Internally, the File System Watcher makes use of a buffer. When file or directory operations are detected by the File System Watcher instance, they go into this buffer, and then the File System Watcher raises its events. The purpose of this buffer is to allow the File System Watcher enough time to raise its events, even if we have a lot of operations happening on disk. We can configure the size of this buffer by setting the InternalBufferSize property. The InternalBufferSize property is of type int, and we can specify a buffer size from 4 kilobytes all the way up to 64 kilobytes. If we don't specify a value for the InternalBufferSize property, it defaults to 8K. Each individual operation in the file system that's detected requires 16 bytes in the buffer, plus an additional number of bytes depending on the file name. Microsoft also recommends that this InternalBufferSize property is set to a multiple of 4K on Intel-based systems. To quote from the Microsoft documentation, if there are many changes in a short time, the buffer can overflow. This causes the component to lose track of changes in the directory. Increasing the size of the buffer can prevent missing file system change events. Increasing buffer size is expensive because it comes from non-paged memory that cannot be swapped out to disk, so keep the buffer as small as possible. Exactly what buffer size you'll need to set for your application will depend on the frequency of file operations that happen to the watched directory or file. So for example, if you only have 1 or 2 files every day dropped into a watched directory, you probably won't need to modify the default buffer size property. At the other end of the spectrum, if you expect hundreds or thousands of operations to occur in a short space of time, you may want to increase the size of the buffer. One way to reduce the number of events that occur and thus help prevent buffer overflows is to configure notification filters. So let's take a look at these next.